I must recall something which I first suggested in 1979 in my book, Prophet of the Past. In 1974, I gave a lecture in Athens, during which a bald-headed man came to my attention because he was taking copious notes. As everyone left the room, he came up to me and inquired politely whether I knew that most Greek shrines and sacred places were sited in an exact geometrical relationship to one another. I smiled and said that I couldn't really believe that, because the ancient Greeks did not have geodesic surveying techniques at their disposal. In addition, I said, the temples were often many miles distant from one another, and the mountains of Greece would have made it impossible to get a direct view from one holy site to another. Lastly, thinking I knew better, I said that the sacred sites were sometimes situated on islands, often as much as 60 miles away from the mainland, and could therefore not be seen with the naked eye. I was thinking of the distances to Crete or Izmir, previously known as Smyrna in Turkey. So what could this friendly gentleman mean? The gentleman introduced himself as Dr. Theophanius Manias, a brigadier in the Greek Air Force. What did such a high-ranking military fellow have to do with archaeology? We drank tea together, and he explained. It was usual, he said, for military pilots to undertake monitoring and practice flights over the mountains, or shooting exercises over the sea. Afterward, they had to draft a report, which included, among other things, the amount of fuel used. Through the years, it had dawned on a lieutenant who entered these data in a book that the same distances and fuel consumption recurred again and again, although the pilots flew different routes over different regions. The lieutenant thought that he had tracked down some kind of fraud, or that the pilots were perhaps too lazy to write up the correct amounts in their logbooks and were just copying from each other. This was investigated, and finally the file landed on the desk of Colonel Manias. He became brigadier later. He took a pair of compasses, placed the point on Delphi, and drew a circle through the Acropolis. Strange to say, the circumference of the circle also touched Argos and Olympia. These places were equal distances from each other. A strange coincidence, thought Colonel Manias, and then placed the compass point on Knossos at Crete. The circumference of this circle also touched Sparta and Epidaurus. Strange. Colonel Manias continued. When the center was Delos, Thebes and Izmir lay on the circumference. When the center was Paros, it was Knossos and Chalcis. When the center was Sparta, Mycenae and the oracular site of Trophonion were on the circumference. Dr. Manias demonstrated this to me on the maps he had spread out, and I was staggered. How could that be? The brigadier noticed my astonishment and asked me if I had heard of the golden ratio. Patiently, he explained it to me. In the golden ratio, a distance is divided into two sections, so that the smaller section relates to the larger as the larger does to the whole distance. Dr. Manias showed me tables and demonstrated it on his maps, and everyone who checks this out will be bowled over. The distance between the cult sites of Epidaurus and Delphi corresponds to the greater portion, that is 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Epidaurus and Delos. The distance between Olympia and Chalcis corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Olympia and Delos. The distance between Delphi and Thebes corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Delphi and the Acropolis. The distance between Olympia and Delphi corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Olympia and Chalcis. The distance between Epidaurus and Sparta corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Epidaurus and Olympia. The distance between Delos and Eleusis corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Delos and Delphi. The distance between Knossos and Delos corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Knossos and Chalcis. The distance between Delphi and Dodoni corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Delphi and the Acropolis. The distance between Sparta and Olympia corresponds to the greater portion, 62%, of the golden ratio distance between Sparta and the Acropolis. I was knocked sideways. Dr. Manias informed me that there existed in Greece an association for operational research whose very educated members had held lectures about these geometrical curiosities. For example, on June 18, 1968, in the premises of the Greek Technical Association, as well as at the headquarters of the Greek Air Force. The audiences had been as baffled as I had been. I later got hold of a document in 2 languages put out by the Association for Operational Research, which had been written with the active support of the Military Geography Department. Dr. Manias also gave me a handsome brochure which documents all these mathematical impossibilities in a way which even a layman like myself can check. Dr. Manias expressly asked me to draw attention to these geometrical aspects for, as he said, the archaeologists behaved as if they did not exist.